Welcome to Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed. Get ready to dive into the world of nonprofits, where the nerdy passion and unstoppable dedication of those making a real impact is celebrated. Together with your host, Jarrett Ransom, the inspiring stories and game-changing strategies of nonprofit leaders will be explored. Join us to unravel the mysteries of successful fundraising, uncover the secrets to effective advocacy, and nerd out over innovative approaches to solving social challenges. Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed is your go-to podcast for no-nonsense discussions with real-life superheroes of the nonprofit sector. Get ready to unleash your inner nerdiness and discover or rediscover how to change the world together. Now let's dive in and embrace the power of our nerdy side.
This next conversation is going to be a two-part conversation and served with a twist. Surprise! I was invited to be interviewed by one of our previous guests. That's right, Tim Lockie from episode 3 asked to turn the tables on me. And when he asked me if he could interview me at the end of his conversation, stating that you, my fellow nonprofit nerd friends, may want to hear from me too, I said yes. Tim is really good at helping other people see themselves. In fact, he's so good at this that he realizes it as one of his superpowers. And I think you'll find that to be true as well. Because during my conversation with Tim, there were several moments of reflection where he helped me see myself and my truth in ways that I have never been able to identify on my own. This conversation was truly a breath of fresh air. It felt so natural. Yet at times, I did find myself diving deeper and deeper into my personal journey, and as you'll hear in our conversation, I even feel like I'm in a big transition right now, and I'm not quite sure what that means. So without further anticipation, or perhaps procrastination on my end, because I'm realizing being in the hot seat as a guest and talking about some of these very personal moments are, at times, leaving me feeling a bit vulnerable. But that's okay. Before you hear from me, though, I do want to give a huge shout out of gratitude to this season's podcast sponsors. Thank you to Fundraising Academy at National University, Nonprofits HQ, and Chazen & Company. With your support, these critical conversations are getting amplified and supporting the many professionals that make up our amazing nonprofit sector. Thank you. Whatever we say during conversation will just get plugged in.
And how are you on time? So we're at 8 after.
Yeah, if we can wrap up by within the hour.
Top of the hour?
Top of the hour. Yeah.
I'll go top of the hour then. Yeah. That's
perfect.
Great. All right.
Yeah.
Great. I'm just checking on that to make sure that that's right. Yeah, good. And the extra screen, like the extra monitor, like throws so much light on that I usually turn it off. So, okay, good. All right. Ready?
Yeah.
Jarrett, welcome to the show. We are so excited to have this conversation, and it's such an honor to be the host and to interview you. So, thanks for the invitation, and thanks for being willing to talk about your own life.
Thank you. I think this is interesting, right? Like totally tables turned. I have not done this. This is season 3 of the podcast. And when you and I were talking, of course, and recording your conversation, that's when this idea sparked, thanks to you, Tim. So I appreciate you inviting me to share a little bit more about myself.
Yeah, I mean, it's a self that we all want to get to know more. So I think that is perfect. I'm going to start by saying that you have had so many hats. Like you've done so many things, both in your personal and in your professional life. I'm curious, what are the roles that you go by in your personal life?
Yeah. You know, even that is changing, which kind of might seem crazy, but just a couple of years ago, I got married. So in my mid 40s was when I finally decided I'm going to change that Miss to a Mrs., right? And that happened. So I've been a mom now. My son's 14, so I've been a mom. Also a dog mom, because I know a lot of our guests have also talked about their, furry family friends. I am a bonus mom. So my stepdaughter, she's currently 22. And so our family grew from 2 to 4, right? Just a couple of years ago, which now adds a whole nother layer of in-laws, which I'm learning the whole in-law conversation. Yeah. And then I am a daughter. So my parents actually just celebrated 57 years of wedding anniversary. So I'm very involved with my family, my parents. I'm a sister. I have a brother. This is ironic, Tim. He also does fundraising. Like, we are both in the fundraising world.
That is really interesting.
It is very interesting. And I must say, I claimed this first, right? I am the youngest, but I claimed this profession first, and then he followed. But yeah, I do wear a lot of hats, a lot of different titles. I also really love to explore. So I wear that explorer badge with pride. And a couple of other titles that I like to throw out besides nonprofit nerd is disruptor and instigator.
Yeah, I keep experiencing that when I talk with you, that you are always on the move. And it feels like, whether it's national parks or it's industry, industry sector changes that are happening, you really seem curious about knowing what's the latest and what's happening next. And so I feel like that leads me to the next question here, which is, with your consulting firm, podcast, speaking engagements, and your role as mother, you have a lot on your plate. So, of course, the question is, how do you manage to balance all of these commitments?
That is a great question. Of course, it's a question I've asked all of my guests, right?
I remember it.
I reflect personally. And just yesterday, I was talking to a previous guest, Sarah Groney, and I was like, I am not balancing well right now, right? Like, I am out of balance. I have recognized that. I am realizing in my current situation, a little bit of financial insecurity has crept into my psyche, into my mindset. And when that happens for me, Tim, the first thing I go to is work, right? Like, how do I fix this financial fear that I have? And where can I secure more finances? Which is typically the number one weight, if you will, that tips my scale of balance, right? Like, my core need is financial security. And this comes from 14 years ago. If you're doing the math, I was on food stamps. I was on government support. In addition to food stamps, like, I was the billboard representative for so many of the community resources and services that you and I help so many of our communities achieve, right? So that is my core need. And when I feel unsteady with finances, that is when my balance gets out of whack.
How do you handle it though? So you've identified that. And by the way, that is brilliant analysis. I mean, it's so encouraging to see someone who has asked themselves the hard questions and just can be forthright about that, what actions do you take then next? Okay, you've identified this. Now what?
Yeah. So I'm a verbal processor, and I hope my husband knew this before he said I do, because it all gets thrown at him, right? Like, all of my verbal processing goes to him. And again, I reference, my parents have been married 57 years. I often talk to my mom every single morning when I'm putting on my makeup. And I verbally process with her, and then she'll say something like, "Oh, I hope you didn't tell this to Josh, my husband." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, mom, if I think it, he hears it, trust me," right? Like, I don't have that filter with him. So my first thing that I do is I verbalize it, right? Like, I speak it into power to really acknowledge awareness so that I'm not wearing it like a piece of clothing. Like, I have spoken it, I've identified it, I've shared this fear with my partner. And then we really talk about solutions, right? Like, is this fair? Is this fear realistic right now? Yes or no? Is it something that's triggering my core need from my past? Yes or no, right? And then what is the reality? So we typically When I was on food stamps, I was working with a finance coach. So we typically go back to our finance spreadsheet, which goes for me all the way back to like 2017. So I have a lot of history in this spreadsheet. It's a little absurd, but it keeps me grounded. We know that we have options. We can talk to a financial advisor, right? Like we know that he and I both have the potential for additional earnings. So that to me is my number one step, is to verbally process it with my partner. Secondarily, go to these resources that I have built and have to really paint the true picture, not just my emotional picture. And then I'm working with the coach. So she also gets to process this with me.
I think it's so important for everyone to see, like, first of all, you're not just passing it off like
Yeah.
everything's okay, right? And I think that is so refreshing because there's actions to take. So first of all, just amazing that you've done that. And then the second thing is I love how you turn to data and information. And I've just been doing a lot of work around personal agency related to AI. And so I've been thinking a lot about the difference between fear and risk. And it just seems like what you're doing is saying, what is the fear versus where is the actual risk?
Yeah,
And really focused on, okay, I've got, like, I can turn the fear alarm off because I'm now looking at the risk.
that's right.
I just think that's amazing.
Yeah,
That's
well, thank you. And thank you, because I didn't, even for my own self, right? I didn't realize that that's what I was doing, was going to the data to really tell the actual story as opposed to my feelings telling the story. Last year I made two big decisions at the same time. And I'll speak just a little vaguely about them because, they're personal, but I made two big decisions. And I remember making them at the same time, and my husband asking me like, well, are they connected or can they be separated? And I said 100% they need to be separated because they're not connected, right? Like it's easy to say, and they're both around money. It's easy to say, well, if I do this, I have to keep the second option. That was my easy solution, but it wasn't the right solution. It wasn't right for my heart. It wasn't right for my intuition, for my gut. I had to focus on each of them individually, knowing they both crept into that financial insecurity core need for me, both of them. So, two big financial decisions last year simultaneously. And I severed both of those. Like basically didn't go forward with the decisions. I ended them, which meant so did the revenue. The
Yep.
revenue did. And I cannot tell you what a relief it was once I had made that decision and verbally shared it with the people that was involved, right? But those were big decisions for me.
Yeah, those are I'm just thinking in my own life, those are the ones that are just they
Yeah.
they're really hard for me to make and they take a long time. And there's no guide on this is when it's time to actually make the call. So you can live in analysis mode forever. So good for you
Yeah.
on using the data, but then really focusing on what is the decision here that I need to make, and then once I make it, what do I do next? So, I really, again, I'm going to say this probably multiple times. That transparency and authenticity is missing from the conversation because people, go social media after they've solved it, and so you never get to see how the cookie's made. You don't see the raw ingredients and you don't see the process. So I
That's
just
right.
feel like that's really helpful. Okay,
Yeah. Well,
that's
thank you. Yeah, I'll just add, like, this is my 16th year of business, right? You and I have talked about this offline several times. 16th year of business. I was raised by entrepreneurs. So I always joke and say, I know what it's like to eat like steak 1 month and spam the next, right? Like it is a roller coaster, high risk, high rewards. And to share with everyone, like, even in my 16th year, I still have that core financial stability need that creeps up and sometimes, like just haunts me in the middle of the night. Like that is still here after 16 years.
yeah. And I would say it is a need and not, it isn't, that's not something that you grow out of. It's like having a need for water, right? Like,
Right. You don't
like you're
grow
not
out
going
of
to get over that one, right? And so there are different triggers for us and different needs that we have. And knowing the difference between those is a lot of mindfulness work,
a lot of
and
money.
separating so I just appreciate that you've done the work. And I think
Thank
that's really helpful. That's okay. So that's the meat and potatoes on the balance side of things. Let's talk about dessert. So what do you do for self-care, relaxation to recharge?
Well, let me tell you. So I am working with a coach, and I love this coach. I've worked with some that have been like very business centric. The one I'm working with now is business and personal focused. So it's a blend, which is how I live my life, right? Like I am not 8 to 5 nonprofit nerd, 5 to 8 in the morning, Jarrett mom, bonus mom, all those things. Like I am who I am 24/7. And she incorporates that. So she was my business attorney that turned into a life/business coach, right? And so I have loved how
Wait, an
she,
attorney? Sorry, I'm sorry to break in. An attorney moved from being a lawyer to being a life coach?
yes. And that
What a road. Wow.
exactly. And that is exactly what attracted me to work with her as my coach, because I put her on this pedestal where it was like, she is an attorney. She's my attorney. She's a sought after attorney in our community. She decided to make a big personal, professional life change. And that was the amplifier, if you will, that I needed to see and witness and someone else to know this is possible. And it gives me permission, right, to kind of do that. So I'm working with this coach, and I forget what your original question was, Tim, because I was just like telling you all about this coach
Keep
that
going. Who cares? This is
oh,
great.
what I do. So I'm working with her. That is something that I definitely dive into for self-care. She keeps me grounded, knowing my woo-woo side, right? Which is really getting into like spiritual exploration. So she supports me in these things, right? So a couple of weeks ago, I cleared my calendar. Again, have the privilege to do that. Cleared my calendar. I went up north in Arizona where it's much cooler and not 100 and stupid here in the valley, right? Where you just melt. I went up to the woods, the forest by myself with my dog and my forerunner. I did a cold plunge, maybe in my birthday suit out in the middle of the forest, right? Nobody was there. My dog was like, what the heck is happening? But I knew that I had to reset my whole system. And this cold plunge thing might be a trend now. Like it's definitely something I'm seeing a lot of. But I knew for me, it needed to be done in nature. It needed to be with connection to source, to the ground, to the earth. And then we camped for the night. So I, mentioned my car. I have a forerunner. So we slept in the car and we came back the next day. Like that to me was grounding. There are no pictures to prove what happened, but that happened. And just Tuesday this week, so I don't know, or late August, now that people are listening to it, this was done in late August. I went to a breathwork event, which was in Salt Lake City. So many people know that I have a condo in Park City, Utah, where it's beautiful. So I went and stayed there for a couple of nights, but I did this breathwork experience, which is an alternative like therapy and healing. The first time I did breathwork, Tim, it felt 2 hours, felt like 20 years of therapy, right? Like this release, this connection to breath, which is what I have to remind myself when things get so overwhelming and I need to focus on my well-being. The first thing I focus on is my breath, right? Like that is the first thing we do when we come into this world, and it will be the last thing we do when we exit. And I need to remember through the mass chaos to simply breathe, right? To breathe. So those are two things that I do, but as you can tell, like I go to nature. I go to things that seem so basic, but they fill me up and they're so joyful for my spirit.
It's interesting. You have a pattern here, it isn't the first thing that you do to go to nature, and it's not the first thing that you do to go to data. The
Right.
first thing you do is you go to coaches and people,
I do.
like consistently. And I feel like there's a superpower that is so important to say, because you're a really strong person who is self-aware and knows who they are and is constantly figuring out more of who they are. And the way you got there wasn't by doing it on your own. It
Yeah.
was going to other people and figuring out who you were with others. And
Yeah.
so with a name like the human stack, right? The stack in there is the community part. And so
Yeah.
community is so critical. We're herd animals, and our core, our base code is belonging. And I just think it's worth pointing out, you lean into that, whether or not you're aware of it or not. Your first move is to find a person and download what's happening and what to do next. And you're really intentional about who those people are. I think that's just amazing.
Thank you. I love this reflection you're giving me, because I'm in this moment realizing that I go, and I might be going automatically, right? But I go to the people, as you said, intentionally. That is very important, because I have found in my 40 plus years of life, right? Like, there are some things that you just don't want to tell certain people, or you
Yeah.
I regret telling certain people, right? And so
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
very curated with who I bring into this core circle to know my most intimate, vulnerable situations, right? Like, I have to fully trust, because I know I've been burned, and I'm sure you've been burned, Tim, and so many of us have been burned. So I'm very cautious of that. And yeah, it's what I do first. Absolutely.
It also sounds like you rhythm that into your life. Like,
Mm.
you don't wait until there's a need for it. You make sure it's part of what you're
Yeah,
doing, so that it doesn't, you're like, then it's just going to happen, right?
that's right. That's a great observation. I've said to many of my friends before, I am not a shallow end swimmer, right? Like, of a swimming pool. Like, I jump into the deep end. Don't ask me a surface level question. Like, when I ask you, how are you? I want to know, like, how are you at your core? Like, how are you today? And not just the canned, I'm good, I'm fine, all is well, right? Like, I love deep, soulful, meaningful conversations and connections. And I tend to surround myself personally with people of that same desire. And so, because of that, what you're helping me to see now, Tim, is that that is a constant for me, right? Like, that is something that I am so lucky to have in my life. And it's not that I seek out a therapy session. I'm almost having these mini soulful therapy sessions every day of my life with friends and partners.
I Yeah, I recognize that in you.